Hello there and welcome to our governance webinar. It's the third in a series of webinars on good governance, and we're looking at a series of topics, today's being diversity and recruiting new trustees. My name's Tracy Bird and I run the SCVO Information Service. And thanks to you all for joining us today. We're running these webinars as we recognise that good governance can make or break an organisation. And as the world has changed, it's more important than ever that trustees are supported as they switch focus from crisis management to recovery. Increasing board diversity was important before the coronavirus pandemic, but now as we rebuild, it has to be a top priority so our organisations and leadership are more inclusive and reflective of the communities we serve. Diversity in all its forms drives better decision making, but I think we all recognise that trustee recruitment can be difficult. And unfortunately, many organisations still rely on word of mouth and existing networks to recruit for their boards. But people of colour, people with disabilities, and young people are all underrepresented on boards. So now is the time to look at how to get a more diverse board with a broader mix of skills, knowledge and experience. So today we're going to look at how to recruit for the future. And I'm delighted that we have with us Penny Wilson from Getting On Board, the National Trustee Recruitment and Diversity Charity. We also have Manish Joshi and Brooke Marshall, both of whom are SCVO trustees, and they're going to talk about their own experiences on boards and how they were recruited. I'm now going to hand over to Penny to look at how you can recruit for a more diverse board. But before I do that, I'm just going to ask you to complete a poll. And that's just really so we can get a sense of where you are right now. So what I'm interested in is how diverse is your board, both in terms of protected characteristics such as race and gender, sexual orientation, but also in terms of diversity of thought and experience. And maybe you're a very inclusive organisation with a really diverse board, hopefully, but that's probably why you're here to learn more. Where maybe you're a work in progress and you know there's groups that are underrepresented on the board, but you're taking steps to address this, or you recognise you're not diverse at all and you need to do something, but you don't know where to start. And if that's the case, then hopefully today will help you. So looking at the figures, I think everybody's being remarkably honest and nobody thinks they're very inclusive with a really diverse board. Most of you are somewhere in the middle, you're a work in progress. There's some groups that are underrepresented, but you're taking steps. And obviously today is one of those steps. So that's great. Thank you for taking part in that. Do use the chat facility as we go to ask questions and offer any of your own hints and tips. And we'll try to cover as much as we can. We're recording this session today. So as I say, just take part and ask as we go. I'm going to hand over to Penny now, and she's going to do a presentation. Thank you, Penny.
Thank you. Apparently I'm on mute. My name's Penny. I'm CEO of Getting On Board. And I'm a serial trustee myself, as well as always having worked in or for the charity sector. So I'm going to talk to you about how to diversify your charity trustee board. I've only got half an hour, but I think I can give you some practical hints and tips based on getting on board, working with several hundred charities directly every year, several thousand more in sessions like this. Plus we work with several thousand people a year who are potential trustees, who we support to become trustees. So this is what I'm going to cover. I'm going to talk through a little bit what the current status of trustee diversity is, some of the statistics. I'm going to touch very briefly on why trustee diversity matters. I think most of you are probably sold into that or you wouldn't be here today. And then I'm going to spend most of my time talking about practical tips to improve the diversity of your board. And then I'm going to touch briefly on the end on inclusion, i.e. what happens to your new trustees when they join your board. Tracy's going to send you these slides afterwards. There are some web links at various points, so don't feel like you need to be scribbling those down. Tracy will send you those. So where are we now in terms of trustee diversity? Now, a lot of these statistics come from England and Wales. There has been no national survey in Scotland that we're aware of, but I would expect Scotland to be pretty similar, to be honest. So the first, whenever we talk to a charity and we say, oh, who's missing from your board, charities will tend to lead with skills areas. And there are certain skills which are repeated time and time and time again, even if there are different reasons for a charity needing them. And I've just put some of those there in that first bullet. The second group of who's missing from charity boards is people with lived experience of the cause, the issue that you're trying to tackle. And in our research, which was UK-wide, we found that 59% of charities said their boards weren't reflective or weren't representative of the communities that they serve. And of course, there's another aspect to this, which is that you might seek to serve a slightly different community from the one that you currently serve. So it might be that certain people aren't currently well represented in your service users. So this is about future service users as well as current service users. And then on to protected characteristics. So there's some stats there for much younger people, but actually 2/3 of trustees are over 50. So people right through their 20s, 30s, and even into their 40s are quite underrepresented on trustee boards. And then gender, women are only 36% of trustees. And I think if we took out certain categories of charities, like, for example, preschools, then that would plummet further. So that's not a good statistic for 2020. People of colour are only 8% of trustees, and that's versus 14% of the wider population. And then other groups we've kind of had to put together because there is little or no research into other protected characteristics and their representation on trustee boards. And then on to class. So 30% of trustees have a postgraduate education, 60% have a professional qualification, and 75% of trustees are from households above the national median for household income. So trustees are wealthier and more educated than wider society. So moving on to why it matters. Now, as I said earlier, I think most of you are probably sold on this because otherwise you wouldn't be coming to a session on trustee diversity. But actually, I think we can often find ourselves, sometimes we're a bit of a lone voice. So it might be that you're thinking, I think we need to do more on our board, but perhaps your other trustees aren't on board with you yet. So it's quite useful to be able to articulate why it matters. I'd love you to tell me in the chat why you think it matters. What are some of the reasons that you've come today? Why does it matter to your organisation to have a more diverse board? Do tell me in the chat pane. And while you're typing, I'll tell you some of the reasons that that I've put together here. So I think number one, challenge and difference are at the very heart of effective governance. So thank you. So Diane, to have different perspectives, diversity of ideas from Thomas, representative decision making, diverse thinking means better decisions. Absolutely, Michael. So if we think about the purposes of our boards, they're to bring different perspective and make good decisions, aren't they? And if we all think the same, we're not going to be very good at governance. And as Michael said, there's research that shows that it's one of the best ways of building resilience, to have people with different relevant perspectives. It's our legal responsibility to do our best by our organisation, and actually lack of diversity is a real risk, isn't it, because of the risk of groupthink. Number four, boards should definitely be close to the changing needs of current and potential service users, as I said earlier. And number five, I think, is my favourite. Like, why would we want to miss out on all of that talent that's out there? Why would we want to do that? And then I'm going to come back to number six, just to look at some of the comments. Yeah, so Daniel says the best way is to work with communities rather than at them. I think that's such a good point. And I think our boards are kind of stuck in it's quite an uncomfortable Victorian kind of model when we look at the statistics across the sector. I'm not talking about your particular organizations, but as a sector, our boards are really stuck in a very kind of wealthy, middle-class people providing for the poor, aren't they? It's a bit of a kind of disconnect. To accurately reflect the community we serve, diverse boards outperform boards without diversity. Yeah, there's lots of research on that, which I think is really interesting. Denise says we're missing large elements of our audience and could be welcoming to more diverse, I think that's diverse users. So yeah, we could have more service users. Great, thank you. So the last one I wanted to pick up on there is number 6. Board diversity is essential for credibility. Now, I've put this one last for a really good reason. This isn't enough in itself to want to diversify your board. If you're only doing it for number 6, don't bother yet. You've got work to do. This can lead to tokenism. It can lead to people coming on your board and not having their voices heard. And it can lead to those people also having a pretty horrendous experience as well, if they think they're coming to be useful and then they're not heard. And let me ask you a few questions about this board. This is a real board, but it is taken from a board in America because I'm not brave enough to put a UK board on there. But just, tell me the answer to some of these questions. What would a grant-making trust think of this board if the organisation was applying for funding for a programme for young women? And what would a potential female donor think about this board? Is this an organisation that she'd be likely to give to? Or perhaps a young person who wants to run the marathon or do another fundraising challenge and is looking for an organisation to fundraise for? And then what about a potential service user? Is this an organisation that they would seek help from? And feel free to put in the chat what you think all of those different audiences would think about this board. What would they know about it? I think that sums it up, Andrew, doesn't it? It'd be difficult to understand the needs of their service users. Yeah, they're homogenous. So credibility is important, isn't it? It is important if we're trying to thrive. It's just not enough. Catherine says they're not very self-aware. Tell us more, Catherine. What do you mean there? And Marion says they're unapproachable. Yeah, and that might be particularly for potential service users, that might be particularly relevant, mightn't it? It looks like a class reunion. Do they all think the same? Maybe they do reflect the service users. Yes, well, that's true. Yeah, maybe they do. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to practical tips. Now, it will be music to your ears that these tips are attainable, they're simple, they don't have to cost lots of money. There is an investment of time, so you are going to need to put some time into this if you want to implement this, but you don't need to spend loads of cash other than in terms of potentially staff time. Of course, it can be done by volunteers and trustees as well. Thank you, Alan. He says his community wouldn't engage with an organisation governed by that group. Yeah, I don't know what your community is, but I imagine there's lots of communities that would feel the same. Yeah. So tip number 1, the very best thing you can do to improve your trustee diversity is to run an open trustee recruitment process. Now, this sounds really pretty obvious, doesn't it? But actually, over 90% of charities still recruit most of their trustees through word of mouth and existing networks. So still, the most common way of becoming a trustee is to be asked. And I think we should ask ourselves why we're not doing that for staff. If we're charities that are lucky enough to be large enough to have staff, why is it that when we need a new CEO or a new fundraiser or a new admin assistant, why don't we just ask around? And the answer is normally, well, that's not the best way of getting the widest pool of brilliant applicants, is it? And actually, we should think the same about trustees. And also it can get us off on the wrong foot with people, we're twisting people's arms. Somebody feels like somebody else is doing us a favor. But sometimes if we know them personally, it's very difficult if they're not pulling their weight and so on and so forth. So it can lead to further governance problems. So this is what an open trustee recruitment process looks like. It looks really very much like recruiting staff. Now, trustees aren't staff. They shouldn't be treated like staff. But the process should be slick, it should be timely, applicants should know exactly where they are in the process and they should know what to expect at every stage. Now, I haven't got time to go through this in detail, but if you want to read more about it, it's all in our free guide and Tracy's going to send you a copy afterwards. And this guide goes through every stage of trustee recruitment. Second top tip is to recruit at the confluence of diversity with skills, knowledge and experience. So you're still going to need to work out what you're missing from your board in terms of skills, knowledge and experience. So whether that's legal expertise, fundraising, digital marketing, I imagine digital's a big thing now after this year, whether it's governance experience and so on, you're going to want to recruit at the sweet spot between what you're missing in terms of skills, knowledge and experience and potentially what you're missing in terms of, for example, underrepresented protected characteristics. So rather than saying, oh, damn, we're all white and our community isn't all white, let's go and find any old black or brown person, you're still going to find someone who can help with racial diversity, but is also going to bring you useful stuff. And that's for the benefit of both the board and the charity, but also the individual who doesn't just want to be there as a token appointment. Tip 3 is to remove all unnecessary barriers. And this is so that your pool is as wide as possible within the skills or knowledge areas that you're looking for. So only you can decide in your organization which of these barriers need to be kept and which can be removed. But every time you put one up, your pool is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So you need to have a good reason to have any of these barriers. So here are some of the really common barriers we put up in trustee recruitment. So do they really need board experience? And for some of you, the answer will be absolutely yes, because perhaps you've got other trustees who haven't been trustees before. But for others of you, you can probably take that one down and give them some training when they come to you. Do people really need a degree? I mean, I think in almost every case, probably not. Do they need detailed understanding of charity governance, or can they be taught later on? Use things like a senior level with really, really great care, because people read that and they don't see themselves in it. And think about practicalities. So do you really need to put a meeting time in the advert, or can you arrange your meetings when you've got your full board and you can ask people what suits them? Are your meetings in locations which people can't get to without public transport? Do you make it easy and discreet to pay expenses? And actually, for some people, they'll need expenses paying in advance, for example, for travel to meetings. And does the time commitment need to be high, and does it need to be the same degree of high for everybody? And within these barriers and within advertising and so on, don't assume that people already want to be a trustee, that they know they already want to be a trustee, but equally don't discount them without having asked them. So don't assume that they wouldn't want to be a trustee, as what, you know, if only they knew about it. Don't assume that trusteeship is open, that they know that trusteeship is open to them. Don't assume they know what a trustee is. Don't assume that they know anything about your charity, or indeed any other charity. Don't assume that they know how to apply, particularly people who haven't been a trustee before. Why would they know what to put in a cover letter? You might need to say to them, please tell us, you know, why you like our charity's work and how you think you could help. So make it very easy for them to get through the process. And also don't assume that potential trustees know how to behave as an effective trustee. And actually, a lot of our existing trustees don't know that either. So you're going to need to help them with that. And let me leave you with a couple of quotes here. So we just need to remind ourselves when we're recruiting for diverse trustees, this is what we're up against. People's perceptions of trusteeship, and I'm not going to say misconceptions, because actually some of them are accurate, is often that it's not open to people like them, that it's only open to older professionals, that you can't apply, that you need to wait to be asked, and so on. So thank you. Claire's gone back to expenses, and she said, having an expenses policy that specifically or explicitly applies for childcare, provides for childcare expenses, has been useful. That's really helpful. Thank you, Claire. Yeah, great. And Alan said his organisation, so that's in your governing document, is it, Alan? So the trustees must be resident in the defined operating area. Yeah, that can be very helpful. And of course, sometimes some of the barriers are actually enshrined in our governing document. So for example, if you're a membership organisation, it might be that all of your trustees need to be members. But don't forget that you have it in your power to change your governing document if you think it's stopping you from getting to where you need to be. So my tip 4, and I'm going to ask you to do some work here in a minute, is about getting your advert right. And I think we very often shoot ourselves in the foot here with trustee adverts. So I've got some real examples here. I'd love you to tell me in the chat what in these examples is restricting the applicant pool or might restrict the applicant pool. So here's the first one. So what here might put people off applying? It's like a professional job ad. Too many requirements. Hannah, tell us what you mean. Professional is daunting, far too much. It's a high bar. Does this person exist is the question, isn't it? And if they do, may I have them, please, for my own board? Yeah. Too much to ask. Absolutely. And actually, it's very confusing, isn't it? Too many things that are specialisms. Yeah, that's absolutely right, Susan. Because, you know, they want HR, they want law, they want something to do with mental health, they want strategic and operational financial management, etc., etc. And the list goes on. And actually, I can see how this has happened. I think if you if you write something like this in a trustee meeting by committee, this is what you end up with. And then, and then if you don't review it with, from the point of view of a potential trustee, this is what the kind of thing that you end up with. And we're all really guilty of putting out stuff like this. This is not an unusual advert. Communicate effectively might put off, absolutely. Okay, so what about this example? And this is an advert, not a role description, by the way. This was in an advert. What here might put people off? Don't know what the Companies Act involves. Yep. Refers to frameworks might not have knowledge of. Absolutely. Sounds like a full-time job. Yeah. Legal responsibilities, what are they? Exactly, Claire. These are things that can be learned, and it's boring. It does sound boring. And that's the point, isn't it? These are things that can be learned. This is what Claire said. So we're not saying that our trustees shouldn't have an understanding of this. We're just saying, does this really need to be in an advert? Because the role of an advert is to inspire people to want to get on board with our amazing organizations. It's not to kind of bore the socks off them and scare them into thinking, well, I've no idea what any of these, bits of the Companies Act 2006 are. So no, definitely not for me. This sitting in an advert is not going to do anything for diversity at all. And here's a final one. So what do you think about this one? What here might put people off? Senior and high caliber, absolutely. People might not see themselves as being senior professionals. Yeah, and actually, we know from research that, for example, women are much less likely to see themselves in descriptions like this. It's very gendered language. Yes, thank you. Marion's seen the error in here. 3 professionals to fill 4 vacancies. Yes, do they want 3 or 4? So there's some confusion in here as well. Does that mean 60 years with a PhD? Yes. So, I mean, good on these charities, because these are real adverts that I just plucked off Google, and good on them because they're out there and they're advertising. But you can see how easy it is to fall into restricting your own pool of applicants and shooting yourself in the foot kind of by mistake. So when you come to write an advert, do get somebody else to look at it. But if you can get somebody outside your charity, a family member to have a look at it, and say to them, would you apply for this? And if they say no, say, well, why not? And just do it, check on your language. So just to pull that bit together, here are some of the things you should be thinking about including in your advert. And if you look at our guide, it lists all this out, and there's some really good, there's some templates on our website that you can take and use as well, some template adverts. And in terms of diversity, there's some really useful wording you can use in adverts. So if you don't want previous board experience, it's really worth saying that, because that really helps people. Saying things like, we welcome applications from all ages and backgrounds, or being really, really specific. So you might say, we'd really welcome applications from people of colour because we want to improve the diversity of our board. I mean, you can be absolutely explicit, and that really encourages people to apply. So tip number 5 is around advertising. Now, we have a bit of a habit of kind of either not advertising at all, or just kind of doing a bit of lame advertising and expecting people to find us. And with advertising, our job is to get out there and get it in front of the people that we would like to apply. So it's somebody described it to me as, well, oh, it's like outreach, because their charity did outreach. It's like outreach. It is exactly like outreach. So of course, you'll be wanting to do some general advertising. You'll be wanting to use some of the trustee listings websites. You'll be wanting to go to your local CVS or your volunteer centre and so on. Here's some more links. This is a bit where I said you'll be sent the slides afterwards, so don't worry that I'm whipping through them. All of these that we've put here are free, I think. Good Moves actually might make a charge. Do you know, Tracy? Yeah, I think they make a charge. The others are all free. You'll also be wanting to think, obviously, about your own communications. You'll be wanting to put things on social media. If you're locally based, you'll be wanting to put things in things like parish magazines or neighbourhood Facebook groups and so on. For some of these, people have already worked out that they want to be a trustee. So things like Reach, for example, people are there and they place hundreds of people each year. So it's a brilliant platform. and people have already worked out they want to be a trustee. And that's both good and bad, because great, people want to be a trustee. Bad, you're reaching people who haven't yet decided that they want to be a trustee. And that's partly why we need to go broader. So on to targeted advertising. Have a think about where you're going to find the trustees with the specific skills, knowledge, experience that you need. So who employs them? Where do they work? What do they read? What professional association do they belong to? Which websites are they looking at? Which networks do they belong to on LinkedIn and Facebook? I mean, there's a professional network on LinkedIn for almost anything. It's really, really niche, and you can just go straight to these places and ask them to send your advert round. There are also networks that are built around protected characteristics. So here are just some completely random ones that I took off Google. Now, these aren't places that regularly advertise trustee positions. These are places that you would be contacting saying, you know, we're looking for a trustee. We're a fantastic organization, and this is a wonderful opportunity for somebody to give back. And you just be asking them to send on your advert with, you know, you're not paying them. And most of these kind of organizations are very happy to do this. So just to give you a kind of worked example of this, this is actually an example from Getting On Board's own trustee recruitment from earlier this year. And you'll see, and we do far more than you would need to do, by the way, because we're a trustee recruitment charity. So we go all out when we're recruiting our own trustees. But you'll see here that there's some generic places. And then we had 4 different areas, 4 different skills areas. So you can see, so for example, for digital marketing, we went to the Media Trust, which is a free place to advertise for volunteers. We went to a charity marketing group on Facebook. We found a LinkedIn group called Charity Digital Marketing Jobs. We went to the CIPR, and we went to Charity Comms. But we also wanted to recruit more people of colour to our board. And we got this brilliant list from Malcolm John at the Action for Trustee Racial Diversity. His list has got about 350 organisations on it, but we picked the ones that were either enormous networks like the Black Young Professionals Network, which has 40,000 members, or that were really specific to the skills areas we were looking for. So just moving on to tip 6, shortlisting and interviewing fairly and objectively. And I just wanted to remind us what boards are for. So this lovely cartoon is from Diana Garnham, who's a governance expert. She had a whole series commissioned about the good, the bad and the ugly of board behaviours. And this isn't how an effective board should feel. And I think this is what we need to remember when we get to shortlisting and interviewing, because, you know, we can work out what we need. We can write a fantastic advert. We can do a really good job at diverse advertising. We can get all of these applicants who are exactly what we think we're looking for. And then we can fall over our own feet when we get to shortlisting and interviewing. And that's normally because we're recruiting for fit. And recruiting for fit is the absolute enemy of diversity. So it's different to recruiting for passion, because of course it goes without saying that you're going to want every new trustee to love your work and really, really, you know, really feel passionate about what you're trying to achieve. But do you want them to get on with fellow trustees? You know, oh, maybe they're going to rock the boat. Maybe they're going to upset someone. Well, actually, that's kind of what they're there to do. They're there to bring different perspectives. It does mean that you're going to need to help them understand what constructive behaviour looks like, so that you can disagree with people without getting personal, for example. But this is important when you think about shortlisting and interviewing. So I'm not going to go through these in detail, but do have a look in our guide for some shortlisting and interviewing tips. On interviewing, remember that an interview should be to help the candidate tell you how they're going to help, and to do their very best. It shouldn't be to trip them up. And again, what I said earlier, just remember that you're helping people to know what to expect in the process so that they can do their very best. Tip 7 is about induction. Tell me in the chat what you would like to include in an induction for a trustee. So that isn't what you currently do, but what you think would be a brilliant induction. And if you're here as a trustee yourself, what would you have liked to have been told in induction? So tell me about people you might have liked to meet, documents you might have liked to receive, any training you might have liked to have had. Yeah, meet the staff and visit premises. What's an expected contribution in board meetings? That is a brilliant one, Hannah. who's who in the staff team, meet the volunteers, buddying with another board member. That is genius, Diane, absolutely right. And I think buddying up for the first year or so is brilliant practice. I think as a new trustee, you often don't know, do you, what you need until 2 or 3 meetings in. And we tend to have stopped our induction processes by then. To be able to find info in one place, because so much is in people's heads. Thank you, Claire. The actual time commitment, not just the 12 meetings a year. Yes, and that's so important, Ruth, isn't it? Because actually you could be mentioning that at advert stage so that things don't become unstuck further down the line. Knowing all the language, a handover process, a reminder of why you've been invited. Yes, Hannah, I think that's so important, isn't it? That, you know, to actually have a conversation about, well, I was recruited for this reason, so how am I going to help with that thing? Repository of key documents. Great. So we know all this, don't we? We kind of know what to include in inductions. We just don't always do it. We tend to send a single email with some documents, and maybe we have a couple of meetings and then we leave trustees to it. And this is important for all new trustees, but it's going to be particularly important for trustees that are different to the other people around the table, where perhaps, you know, there's a lot of acronyms and history and so on. That's great. Thank you. Yeah. Lots of excellent ideas there. And then my final tip is just do it. So sometimes there's a reticence around trying to diversify your board, and it feels like there's a particular reticence around improving the racial diversity of your board. But actually, it's really important that we just, you know, hold our hands up and say we need to take action here, and we're willing to make mistakes. We're on a journey, and the best thing is to just be completely honest about the improvement that you're trying to make, and that you're on a journey and that you want to learn. So they're my top tips. I want to talk about inclusion now. So this is the final bit, and this is just what happens when you get on a board. I would love you to tell me in the chat, how did you feel at the first trustee meeting that you ever attended? Intimidated, terrified, intimidated, out of your depth, nervous, misled. Oh dear, Alan. Like you should have known things you didn't, overwhelmed, like a minority, quiet, baffled, unsure. And actually, some of you, you know, perhaps weren't the person that diversified your boards. Some of you probably had loads of board experience and committee experience. So I think this just shows that we all feel like that. So it's only going to feel more of the same if you walk into a room and you are different to the other people around a table. You're confused and unsure. And I think the reason why we need to get this right is encapsulated in this comment here. This comes from the Harvard Business Review. And actually, I'm just going to summarize it for you, which is basically all of the research benefits that somebody mentioned earlier. So that the benefits that research shows to diversifying your board, which includes more innovation, raising more money, making better decisions, and so on. Actually, if you don't listen to the new people who join your board, you needn't have bothered. You needn't have bothered diversifying your board unless you've got space there for people's voices to actually be heard. And this is a quote that came out in one of our research studies. And I mean, this is really, really horrifying. And this particular study that we did, it wasn't about discrimination. It was about barriers to becoming trustees. And we were bombarded with comments like this. And I think a question to be asking yourselves as a board is, you know, how are we going to make sure that the people or person that joins us, that their voices are heard just as loudly as everybody else's? And what are our individual roles in that, as well as the whole board's roles? Because we all have a role to play in the inclusion of new trustees. So I'm going to stop there. I'm just going to leave you with some links for getting on board. We've got a Festival of Trusteeship next week with lots of different sessions. Some of them are around trustee diversity. There's also sessions for aspiring trustees. There's sessions for charity leaders if you want to brush up your skills. All of the sessions are somewhere between £3 and £15, and I've given you a 50% off code there. So please do join us. You can find lots of stuff on our website, and we also have various training and different programs for trustee diversity as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides and pass back to Tracy.
Thanks, Penny. That was great. There was a lot of information in there, a lot of good ideas. And as you said, we will send out the slides and the resources that you produce tomorrow. I'm now going to hand over to Manish and to Brooke to tell you about their experiences of being a trustee and why they think a diverse board is crucial to good governance. And, you know, if you've got any questions for Penny or for Manish or Brooke, do put them in the chat and we can get some conversations going. Okay.
Hello, everyone. Really excited to be here. Looking forward to talking to you all.
Yeah, hi, folks. Thank you very much for having us, and thank you, Penny. I think that was there was so much to take in there, but so much I hope that we might pick up on actually in our discussion between Brooke and myself. We actually thought we'd do this as a bit of a conversation really between the two of us, just talking about our own experiences and learning a little bit more about each other. Brooke and I, as Tracy mentioned, are both SCVO members, and I actually don't know Brooke all that well. I've been on the SCVO board for just under a year, and I'm hoping I get to know him a little bit more through this. So Brooke, do you want to just tell me a little bit about your experience as a trustee and how you became a trustee?
So yeah, I think that that journey is interesting because I actually became a trustee on accident. I was in 2015 elected to be president of Advertising Students Association, and I was the young age of 23 at the time, and I didn't realize that actually that came not only with being the chair of the board of the organization, but also being on the university's governing body as well. I didn't find that out until after I was elected. So let's start with induction. We'll come back to that. Induction is very important for trustees, and knowing that they're going to be trustees is also very important. But that happy accident led to me to date having been on 5 boards. I consider myself kind of a serial trustee. I've got the governance bug and I can't help myself. So that's me. I've chaired 2 and I've been on 5 in total. So yeah, I think for me, that was the kind of flashpoint that sparked my love of governance. And I'm really grateful to have had that opportunity at such a young age. Something Penny picked up on earlier is that one of the most stark inequalities on boards is age. Only 3% of trustees in the UK are under 30. Interestingly, there are more people called John than there are people under the age of 30 on boards in the UK at the moment. So that's quite interesting. So how did you become a trustee, Manish?
Yeah, I've probably a bit like yourself. I've caught the bug. Certainly, I've been a charity trustee in various different charities for about 20 years now. And I think for me, actually, it probably started when I was at university and I did a gap year with an organisation. And when I came back, they invited me to join their board. And I think since then, I've been on a number of boards. I currently sit on about 5 boards just now, which is probably too many. I think I'm certainly finding that with COVID, I've maybe overextended myself. But they range from some smaller charities working at a very local level on the south side of Glasgow where I live, through to national charities that operate throughout the UK. And I think for me, it's a constant evolution of your own learning as you go through this. And I think in many ways, society has kind of gone way ahead of where we're at in terms of governance and the relationship with boards in terms of the piece around culture. I think boardrooms, and a lot of charity boards still have, I think, a more antiquated sense of how things used to be or how things should be even, as opposed to where society's at. And I'm the Chief Executive of Students' Union at Strathclyde Uni. And so I have the privilege of working with lots of young people. And I'd like to think that our board is quite diverse, but it changes all the time because, as you've said, people are elected, so we don't know who's going to get elected. But we don't tend to have, I think the culture changes quite quickly, and actually there's not really an established culture. So you can get a new chair or a new student president every year, and they'll bring their own unique sense of how they're going to run the meetings. But I do think this piece around culture is something we need to reflect on, because so often I think on boards we spend a lot of time making sure we fill the gaps around finance and legal and HR, And we don't probably spend a lot of time, at least I don't, from my experience, talking about the power dynamics, about diversity of thought, around training trustees on things like unconscious bias, on tackling prejudices that they may have, they may not even know they have them, as they come into these positions. And more, I think society is talking about these things, but I'm not sure they're necessarily filtering into our boardrooms.
I think that for me, what's interesting is that culture on boards tends to be much more disproportionately affected by people's diversity of backgrounds rather than diversity of skill sets. So, you know, lawyers don't tend to act the same, but that idea that diversity brings diversity of thought, I think is really interesting. An example of that is I was once working with a board where, and I think Penny mentioned something similar earlier, I was once working with a board where we did a skills audit. And what we wanted to use a kind of different way of wording it than you normally would. So what we were doing was asking, how confident do you feel with XYZ, whether it was HR or law or whatever. And when we got the skills audit back, it produced startlingly gendered results. We saw that male trustees were putting their confidence in these things way higher than women or other people who actually had professional skill sets in those things. And it just goes to show you how much that culture relies on diversity. So that the idea of language that doesn't necessarily in the face of it seem gendered or seem like it might have diversity and equality impact totally can, which is why you have to be so careful with word choice, and especially in things, as Penny was saying earlier again, like board adverts and vacancies and stuff. One of my favorite things that I came across in board adverts was somebody asked, we would particularly encourage candidates with lived experience of injustice to apply, which I thought was really, really powerful language and very evocative. And candidates then like had quite like a reflective moment and being like, have I faced injustice? And that necessarily isn't limited to protected characteristics per se. It can also be socioeconomic or whatever. But I thought that was a really good, powerful way of demonstrating that commitment to recruiting diverse boards. I wanted to ask you a question actually. What kind of barriers or challenges have you faced because of your identity whilst being on a board?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think sometimes it's hard to pinpoint if you face barriers because you don't always fully appreciate them at the time. But I think looking back sometimes on some experiences, there's definitely that sense that you certainly felt that what you were saying maybe wasn't taken as valid as other people. Sometimes that can be, I think, based on your age as well as your identity. I think there's often challenges as well around I guess tokenism, to be totally honest. You know, I think we've seen the work from Charity So White down in England, and I think it's an even bigger issue in Scotland, if I'm being honest. I think we really struggle to get people of colour onto our boards, and so I think often you can be the only person of colour in a room, let alone in a board or within an organisation too, and so I think there's challenges there. And I think that also speaks to the lack of role models right across all characteristics. We don't see very many people who look like us often on boards. We probably don't do enough to communicate from organisations out about the diversity that is already on some of our boards. I guess when you think about some disabilities as well, we have hidden disabilities, so people might not know actually that there are more diverse people sometimes on boards than they would give them credit for. But I think in my own experience, I haven't found a great deal in terms of barriers, but I think a lot of it comes down to the more, I guess, subtle microaggressions that you sometimes pick up in just the way people speak to you or don't speak to you. I think sometimes can be part of the challenge. I think again back to that piece around culture, it's around is there a kind of charter on board behaviours? What's the expectations from people? How do board members hold each other to account in terms of how they're going to behave? And when we see bad behaviour, do we feel brave enough to call it out? And I have been in board meetings where I have seen people acting in ways that I don't think we would want to see in any organisation. And often I think that comes down to power dynamics. It comes down to the fact that, well, the lawyer does that for a living maybe, and just kind of rips people's arguments apart, and actually somebody's just trying to come at something from a totally different perspective. And I think that's why, you know, diversity on boards is so critical, and I think culture goes hand in hand with that.
I think in terms of culture, I want to quickly go back again to language choice in terms of kind of empowering people who are on boards who are slightly different backgrounds. So when I first joined the board at Aberdeen University, obviously being in a huge organization like that with tons of subcommittees which I sat on, I was coming across concepts that completely were going above my head. I had no idea how pensions worked, pension deficits, any of that kind of stuff. But one of the most, and that kind of language is what it is, it's a professional skill set, you need to learn it. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting and that I struggled with was even idioms that people were using, I wasn't familiar with. So things like something in the hand is worth two in the bush, or do you know what I mean? Like my generation don't speak like that, and I had no idea what they were talking about. And there tends to be a professionalized language that is used, things like words like dovetailing, cross-pollination and granularity and stuff. That tends to be quite an insular thing that can be quite difficult for new trustees to engage with and get involved with, because they're sitting there from day one feeling quite invalidated and insecure already because they have no idea what people's talking about. And actually, if people unpack those sentences and said an extra couple of words, everyone would be more included. One of the things that I've come across is on boards that has been quite difficult is, as a non-binary person, something that's really important on boards and something that I believe strongly in is gender balance. But when I come on a board, it can often cause some issues. People are like, oh no, what happens with the gender balance? We've never accounted for a non-binary person coming along before. And that kind of throws everything skew if. A lot of people, like even when I'm filling out forms or stuff, there's not the correct options and things for me. And speaking to people about pronouns can be like quite awkward, especially if you are young and you're new there. So I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about. And in terms of speaking about being in the minority, I can count the amount of non-binary trustees that I know on one finger, and that's me. I don't know anyone else. And I'm on the board of my local TSI and SCBO, and like go to COSWO meetings. And so I know a lot of people in the third sector, and I still, that's it as far as I know. So feeling like a minority in that sense can be quite isolating, actually. And I think that's something that not a lot of people are even aware of.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point that you're making there, just about, you know, how we can even do simple things. I think in terms of updating our paperwork, you know, in terms of making sure that it matches not just all the legislation, but goes beyond that. Because I think so often in the sector, we're trying to do more than the minimum. We're trying to really push society on a number of areas. So I think that's a really good point. I think your point about jargon and institutional elements too. I think in a lot of charities, people have been doing the same thing for so long, and I think we don't take enough time sometimes just to reflect back and look at, you know, how things need to maybe change. You know, I think boards are often just on that cyclical basis. There's not, you know, there's the odd strategy day that comes in and everyone goes away and does a bit of blue sky thinking and then goes back on their way. And I think there is a piece there around, you know, taking a moment to actually take stock and look at, you know, how language can be updated. And I think that's back to the training piece as well. You know, for board members, how do you provide that training for people around issues to do with gender, to do with race? And I think, you know, over the summer we've seen a lot with Black Lives Matter and issues around race, not just in America, but I think in the UK especially and globally. And I think we are moving to a place now where we need to be looking at how we create anti-oppressive cultures. And, you know, I think that starts, you know, right from the top. They say culture's kind of set from the top, and I think boards are really responsible for that. And I think it's something we have to wrestle with, I think, as a sector. I just don't think we're providing enough spaces maybe to talk about it and where things do go wrong, because I think there's also a whole group of people out there who've had bad trustee experiences, unfortunately, and don't want to get back involved. And I think we're losing a lot of talent potentially as a result of that.
I think training and induction is so important and critical for setting the tone from day one to welcome and encourage and empower new trustees. But if you'll indulge me in a quick tangent, one of the things that I want to talk about is boards bottling it when they recruit. So I've seen it in a lot of occasions, and I can say this because I've applied for these positions where you've seen a job advert and they're like, we would really welcome applications from young people, would really welcome applications from people with lived experience, would really welcome applications from people who are disabled or with mental health experience or LGBTQ+. And I like tick quite a lot of those boxes. So I'm like, okay, let's do this. And I go away and send up a strong application and I'm feeling really happy about it. And then I'll get a rejection. And I'll be like, that's fair enough. Maybe there was another candidate who met those criteria who was more experienced than me. But then you'll see that they pointed someone who definitely did not meet those criteria later when they post on social media, welcome our new trustee. And I think that can be one of the biggest first barriers that people come across when they apply for a trustee position. They maybe get up the confidence to think, okay, well, maybe this is for me. I don't fit the stereotype of maybe an older gentleman in a three-piece suit, but I'm going to try it and I'm going to go for it anyway. And then they get a rejection, even though they've been proactively encouraged by the job advert, and then they see the person who's got it. And I think that can be really disheartening for a lot of people and actually stop people then going on to apply in the future. And I think maybe that organization is inadvertently, by asking for diversity and then bottling it, had an impact beyond what it might have anticipated or what might have expected. And I think that's a real shame. In terms of induction, so I think we all know that the cycle needs to be broken of appointing people who kind of look the same on boards. And because that's happened for so long, and we're now we're breaking the cycle and we're having these conversations and things like this. It means up until this point, unfortunately, a lot of those opportunities have been afforded to the same types of people over and over again. And that we're now in the process of breaking that cycle. So it's important for us to recognize that maybe people from some backgrounds may not have had the same opportunities and may not have the same experience because they literally could not have had that up until recently. So we need to build that into our induction and training processes from day one to make sure that people are hitting the ground running and given all the expertise that they need. I think what Penny said earlier about not asking for, you must know the Charities 2005 Act inside and out, and you must understand the role of a trustee, and you must know what a notifiable incident is. They don't need to know that. If you're looking for if you're not looking for someone with governance experience, just make sure all of that is built into the training and induction, rather than asking for that outright, because that'll help break that cycle as well.
Yeah, I would agree definitely. Induction is hugely important, and I think probably we need to do a webinar on that next year. I think about particularly the challenges of inducting staff trustees remotely. And it's all about people dynamics, isn't it, on a board, and getting people to work well together. So how do you do that over Zoom? That's a whole different thing, I think. Yeah. We've only got a few minutes left, so I don't know whether anybody's got any questions or points that they want to make. I think the whole discussion has been brilliant. There's some really good ideas to take away. If you've got any questions, do put them in the chat. I've got another poll I'm just going to put up because I want to know what you're going to do now, really, to recruit new trustees and make your board more diverse. I hope you're all fired up. So are you going to do a skills audit to see what's missing? You're going to make some kind of internal changes to make your board more accessible, or an open recruitment campaign, or, think about the induction process. So just interested to know what you'll do next. So there's a lot really about open recruitment and the trustee recruitment pack, working on that. And there's certainly a lot in Penny's materials that will help you with that. A lot of good places that you can advertise. Brilliant. That's great. There's a question here, Penny, about different responses to board recruitment for rural versus urban areas. I was actually just thinking as well, Penny, now that we're doing so much remotely, you can recruit from a wider pool now, can't you?
Definitely. I mean, there's a point there about digital inclusion and whether the current way of doing things is truly open to everybody, which I guess is another slant on diversity. But yes, there's some, if we are all doing our boards remotely and we can do the recruitment process remotely, it may take away some of the barriers for some, but it's definitely erecting barriers for others. So we need to kind of balance that off. Susan, I don't know exactly what you were thinking about. I mean, I think geography's really important, and I think we've got a lot of organisations. I mean, I'm thinking particularly about national organisations that are based in London, and they're meant to be serving the whole of the UK, and every single one of their trustees lives in London. And you just kind of think, and of course, you know, that's replicated for local and regional organisations as well in a different way. It might be that you know, we're a county-wide organisation, but all of our trustees are in the county town. So I think that's very important, as well as what Tracy was saying about the process.
Yeah. Great. Well, I would just like to thank all of our speakers and you all for taking part. I think it's been a really useful session. As we said, we'll email out the slides to you and Penny's excellent resources from Getting on Board. And they also include details of what they've got planned for Trustees Week, which starts on Monday. We've got our own events in Scotland too, which you can find details of on the Third Sector Governance Forum website, and I'll send those details out. You can book. We've got events going on all during the week. And one of the few advantages of our current situation, I suppose, is that you can attend all of these great events from the comfort of your own homes. We're also planning next year's Good Governance webinars. I think these have been judged a success. So I'm keen to hear what you think would be good topics for discussion next year. If you'd like to leave some ideas in the chat box or get in touch with me via email, that'll help us plan our programme for next year. And once again, thank you to all our speakers and yourselves for taking part, and good night. Thank you.